Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 1 in 4 annual report launch for 2021. My name is David Kuttner. I'm the chairperson of 1 in 4. I'm joined by Maeve Lewis, the CEO of 1 in 4, and Bernard Gloucester, CEO of TUSLA, who's kindly agreed to be our guest speaker today. Before we get started, I'd just like to thank a number of people. Firstly, I'd like to thank our statutory funders, the HSE, TUSLA, and the Department of Justice for all their support. I'd also like to thank the board for their commitment and level of professionalism and all their committee work over the last year. Most importantly, I'd like to thank the staff for their continued vocation to 1 in 4. We moved offices earlier this year and the new building is a vast improvement. The extra effort required to facilitate this move is much appreciated. As most of you know, we provide therapy and advocacy to survivors of child sexual abuse. There's huge demand for our services. Unfortunately, we continue to have a sizable waiting list. But we want to provide services to these people. We do not yet have the resources to make this possible. So I appeal to all parties, institutions, corporates, individuals, to help, which is clearly such a worthy mission. Finally, I'd like to hand over to Maeve, our CEO.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for attending the launch of our 2021 annual report. And a special thank you to Bernard Gloucester for taking the time to launch the report this morning. Just a few things. We would like people to get involved later on. So you could use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens to put in any questions for myself or Bernard or David. And just to say, this year we have a new look annual report. We decided that the old-fashioned, heavy in text, heavy on stats report, which probably nobody ever really read. So this year, instead, we have a report which is really a pictogram of a client's journey through 1 in 4, and we only have headline stats and finance, but you can find very detailed stats and our audited accounts on the 1 in 4 website at oneinfor.ie. I'm just going to share my screen just to talk briefly through the headline outcomes for 2021. As you can see, we met 117 people for individual psychotherapy, we had 8 people in group therapy, and we did 56 assessment meetings. I don't want to delve too deeply into it, but of our psychotherapy clients, 43%, almost half of them, were sexually abused in their own family. And for many clients, it's a very long and painful journey through psychotherapy. Our clients averaged 2 to 3 years with us. And in fact, we had 25 people over 3 years in 2021. The other change perhaps is that almost a quarter of our clients were online in psychotherapy. Because of the lockdowns with COVID, we had to develop an online service, and it does mean that perhaps more people outside of the Greater Dublin area are now able to attend our expert services. But of course, that places an added burden on the waiting list on people wanting to engage with us. As of December 21, we had 61 people on the waiting list. That may not seem huge, but that actually amounts to about 15 months waiting period. And sadly, during 21, we had to close our waiting list for 4 months. Now, of the people we met last year, 25%, 1 in 4 of them, told us that they had made an attempt on their own lives at some point during their lives. So it's a matter of huge concern to us that we have people languishing on a waiting list for long periods. And of course, when the waiting list is closed, we will always wonder what happened to the people whose names we couldn't even take. I'd like to thank TUSLA because in 2021, they extended our funding for a new role, a waiting list case manager. And that has worked very well because our waiting list manager can provide crisis counselling and some group support to people on the waiting list, which alleviates some of the concern about suicide and crisis clients. We saw 492 people through our advocacy service last year, and our advocacy case managers provide support to people engaging in the criminal justice system, civil processes, and indeed engaging with child protection services in TUSLA. We've noticed a growing desire among our clients to engage in criminal justice processes, and last year we had 53 court accompaniments. Even as I speak, 3 of our advocacy team are in court this morning in the Central Criminal Court and Circuit Criminal Court. And it does speak to the fact that criminal processes are becoming more accessible, more victim focused, more trauma informed, but also to the outrage people are feeling and the absolute desire to do something about what has happened to them. This has certainly been mirrored in the inundation of calls we've had in the last 3 weeks since the news of the abuse in Spirit in schools broke. We've had an average of 20 new contacts every day in those weeks, from men mainly, and mostly in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even a couple of 70-somethings, abused not just in the Spiritans, but with the Dominicans, the Jesuits, the Vincentians, across all the private boarding schools and day schools. And it is so terribly sad that people weren't able to get help at the time the abuse happened, because we've heard harrowing stories of the impact the sexual abuse has had on people's lives, and the effect on their marriages, on their professional careers, on their parenting, which could have been alleviated if services had been available at the time. At 1 in 4, people are sometimes surprised to know that we also work with sex offenders, and our prevention programme is designed to provide individual assessments and group therapy to men and indeed some women who have sexually harmed children. And last year we had 65 people in our offender intervention programme. It's very interesting that for the first time we have a waiting list for that programme, and we work not alone with convicted offenders, but also with people who perhaps will never be convicted, but where there's been a disclosure maybe in the family, and the offender is encouraged to engage with us. That programme is a 2-year programme followed by aftercare, and the outcomes have been very good. So we see this as a core child protection measure at 1 in 4. And just to say, last year, nearly half the men on that programme were guilty of online offending. And people often tend to minimize online offending, talking about child pornography as if it was the same as adult porn. It's not. These are images and videos of child sexual exploitation, and each image and video is a crime scene. There is a real child being abused. And worryingly, a lot of our men on the offender programme tell us that they started to watch these types of images at a very young age, around the time of puberty, and then became sexualized to these images. And international research would suggest that if people begin with online offending, they're more likely to go on then to a contact offence. So that is very sad. I'm just going to quickly move through some of the other work we did. While it's great that so many survivors are prepared to speak out publicly, for many people, they never want to do that. So we do believe part of our work is giving voice to the experiences of survivors and influencing, where possible, the legislation and the official processes with which they must often engage. So last year we served on committees in the Department of Justice and the Central Statistics Office in relation to their ongoing prevalence survey, which will be published hopefully next year. We also work very closely with NGOs. We're all seeking the same ends. So through the Victims' Rights Alliance, and we also convened a CASP stakeholders group. We presented 4 webinars during the year on the challenges that our clients face in engaging in psychotherapy and with statutory services. As David has mentioned, we have a very hard-working board with great expertise, and all of whom serve on various board committees. So the oversight at 1 in 4 and the governance is really very thorough and very transparent, and we very much welcome that and thank our board members heartily for all the time and energy they have put into their role as board members in 1 in 4 and the guidance that they give us. Finally, just to say a word about funding. 75% of our funding comes through the HSE, TUSLA and the Department of Justice, and we are very, very grateful for that funding. But I have to say that, for example, the HSE, which would be our main funder, our funding has been frozen since 2014. And yet, as you know, with inflation, the cost of everything. So we are finding it difficult to retain psychotherapists. We are losing psychotherapists to statutory services because we simply cannot match the pay and conditions there. And that is something I think that is of concern to all the Section 39 organisations within the HSE. Our fundraising and donations were quite significant, and we're also very grateful to all the philanthropic organisations who provided grant aid last year up to the tune of over 39,000. And as you can see, the bulk of our expenditure is staff costs, and then the operating costs, the office rent, and so on and so forth. But I can assure everybody, not a penny is wasted in 1 in 4. So I'm just going to stop sharing, and just to finish, the theme of our work last year was overcoming barriers. And our big question is, why is it so hard for survivors, either when they're children or when they're in adulthood, to disclose the experience of sexual abuse? And what we have found are a number of factors. At a personal level, lots of people think that they are the only person who's ever been sexually abused, and they are almost paralyzed with a sense of personal shame, believing that it was something intrinsic to them that provoked the abuse. And that shame prevents people from speaking out. People are also afraid of disbelief, and particularly when abuse has happened in the families, people often worry, often very realistically, that they will end up being ostracized by their families. And then there are the structural barriers. I mean, Bernard will know very well the challenges of the child protection system, which to my mind is very under-resourced. And there are particular challenges when it comes to historic allegations, which would be the type of notifications we as mandated professionals would be making to TUSLA. I mean, I don't believe the child protection system can hope to properly investigate all the allegations that are notified to them. And I suspect they're going to be further inundated after the recent Phelan court judgment, which insists that everything, whether we have the name of the offender, whether the offender is dead, must all go to TUSLA. So I really don't envy the people on the child protection teams having to deal with that. In terms of the criminal justice system, the guards have made big progress in recent years, and there is a special protective service unit in every area of the country now, where there are specially trained detectives to engage with survivors and investigate the cases. However, research we published in 2022, this year, which was funded by IREC, show that while many people have a very good experience engaging with the Gardaí, others still are treated with a great deal of insensitivity and unprofessionalism. And of course, the criminal trial continues to be a source of great distress to our clients, who still describe that experience, despite the very important changes that have been made in the trial system, which has made it much more victim focused. But people still describe that experience as being dehumanizing, humiliating, re-traumatizing. And in a sense, for historic cases, there is no forensic evidence. So everything hinges on the credibility of the survivor's statement evidence. And of course, a good defense barrister's role is to, insofar as possible, discredit that credibility, and people find that very difficult to deal with. But nonetheless, there have been really important changes. Just to finish, I really want to ask, why is the onus always on the survivor to disclose? Where are all the people, the bystanders, who must know that something is wrong? What is it in Irish culture that stops us speaking out when we have suspicions, when we have concerns? I mean, despite all the progress of the last 20 years, Ireland is still a place where 1 in 4 children experience sexual violence, and that is supported by research by Villiers and his colleagues in DCU as recently as 2020. So we really hope that all these recent shocking disclosures relating to the Puritans and other religious orders, and to the Scouts, and just this morning a report has gone to one of the voluntary ambulance services, we really hope that this might be an opportunity to begin to drive systemic change in Ireland, and to really explore the root causes of why sexual abuse is so pervasive, why so many children are harmed. And we also hope it may be a defining moment in creating properly resourced, immediately accessible services to help heal the pain and the suffering and the damage that has been caused. With all the statistics, we can forget that behind each number is a real person who has suffered, who is in distress, who has had, his life has been hugely contaminated by what has happened to them. Just 2 weeks ago, a video appeared on Instagram. One of our clients, Jack Fitz, who hadn't discussed it with us, decided to speak publicly about his experience of sexual abuse. It's a short video, but it's very compelling and powerful. And in it, Jack just talks about what his life has been like as a result of what happened to him as a child. So it's just a short video, and if Kerry wouldn't mind sharing that now.
Before I start this video, I just want to kind of make my intention and my goal with it, I guess, pretty clear. Before I start this video, I just want to kind of make my intention and my goal with it, I guess, pretty clear. So the first reason that I feel that I want to share this is, and I am going to be reading a small bit because I can't get through it otherwise, I don't want to feel like I have to hide this part of my life anymore. I've been doing that for as far back as I can remember, and I'm just not really willing to do it anymore. The second reason is I want to show others that they don't have to go through this alone, and I also want to just show some, I guess, hope and positivity in a topic that's generally just unspoken about, and when it is, it's really dark, and rightly so. But I think a bit of like maybe hope on the topic could be helpful. So again, just before I start, this is going to talk about childhood sexual abuse. So if anyone's not able for that, this is your opportunity to leave the video, and absolutely do if you need to, it's no problem. So around the age of 5, the sexual abuse began and went on for a further 5 years. For so long I blamed myself. I was so ashamed that I never said anything or that I didn't fight back. But I've learned that what was being done to me was thought through, calculated and manipulative. I was groomed, threatened and lied to. What I was told was normal was not. But it was my normal. I was 5 when it started, and I didn't know any different. I buried those memories as deep as I could for as long as I could, with the hope of never having to deal with them or confront them. But as I struggled through my teens and into my 20s, I realised that wasn't an option. My life so far has been filled with so many amazing moments and amazing people, but it's never actually felt like my life. One sec. For so many years, I've hidden behind a smile, while on the inside the thought of one more day was unbearable. I have had, and still do, struggle with self-harm. I have attempted to take my own life on 3 separate occasions. I've seen the inside of more doctors' offices and psychiatric facilities than I can count. But, and there is a but, I'm still here. And at the very least, I think I owe it to myself, and maybe I owe it to others a little bit too, to show that you can live a full life and that there is hope after all of this. For the past 2.5 years, I've been working with One in Four to get my life back, to talk through the things that I buried so deep that it took me about 6 months in that room with my amazing counsellor to actually get to it. The support, the kindness and the understanding is something that I have never experienced in my entire life, particularly in a professional setting. And I'm going to be forever grateful to One in Four, and particularly to my counsellor, for all the help that they gave me. And it's given me hope that for other survivors of childhood sexual abuse, that there is hope and that there is help out there, and it's good help. In the last year, I've really started to understand myself and my way of thinking. I've been able to view the world through a different lens for the first time in my life. There seems like there actually is hope. I am no longer controlled by the darkness of my childhood. The work that I've done was grueling, confronting, and at times I thought I would have to walk away from it. But I would do it all again to get the life that I deserve. To anyone out there who may be in the position that I was in 3 years ago, feeling lost, hopeless, and like there is no way forward, know that you're not alone. There is help out there, and you
So I think you'll all agree with me that really brings home the impact of sexual abuse, but also it's a story of great hope. And we very much thank Jack, who gave his consent for his video to be used here this morning. So I just want to finish by again thanking the board, but in particular thanking our marvellous staff who always go the extra mile, and they've shown that again in the past 3 weeks when we have been so busy with all the additional calls. So David, are you going to introduce Bernard?
No problem. Thank you, Maeve. Yeah, thanks again to Bernard for becoming our guest speaker today. And without further ado, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David, and it's lovely to be here. And thanks indeed to Maeve for the kind invitation, and to the team at 1 and 4. Could I start by saying that I was going to start by talking about the value of the organisation that is 1 and 4. I think the most striking thing I could say today is for us to recognise the generosity of what you've just seen from Jack. Generosity to live a life experience that we know from all of the evidence is the source of serious and significant trauma. A life experience where a young child is exploited and abused for the gratification or for other reasons of others, but outside of their control and outside of the power of that child. And as a young adult, behind the smile, what a lovely smile it is, behind the smile, to talk about behind the smile, and to talk about the journey of therapeutic support, the journey of life-changing support, and to be able to give that so generously for others who may be that 5-year-old, 6-year-old, or 7-year-old little boy today. That's the significance of the issue as a society, that responding to child sexual abuse, and indeed child abuse in all of its forms, that's the significance of that issue for all of us as a society. But it is, as Jack said, there is hope, and it is also the significance of the value of an organisation of the work of 1 and 4, which is reporting on its year for 2021 today. Even the report format itself shows the amazing agility of an organisation to be able to capture message and communicate that message. Thankfully, long gone are the days of 400-page annual reports, which few had time to read, and enormous energy went into perhaps an important message that became lost. But the message is very clear from these documents. I want to talk about a couple of things outside of the facts and figures that I think are particularly striking. And they're not necessarily relevant for us alone as the Child and Family Agency, the state authority responsible for the protection and welfare of children, but perhaps more relevant to all of us, to all actors in society, to all state agencies, and more relevant to all of us as a society and as a people in our discourse about our fellow citizens and the once very hidden, but now still hidden, instance of abuse in the lives of people. Perhaps less hidden now, but nonetheless still hidden for those 5-year-old Jacks that may be experiencing that today. And I want to talk about the voice that 1 and 4 brings to that person, to each person they encounter. They bring a voice to that person, a voice in the counselling relationship, a voice in the therapeutic intervention, a voice for the person to take back for themselves, to talk about their journey, but to talk also about having to, unfortunately, have the resilience to overcome that challenge and live some quality of life. Resilience is a wonderful, wonderful quality. It really is. But we've talked about the resilience of children in Ireland more in the past 3 years because of the influence of the pandemic and what that meant for their lives. And that is okay, because that's a resilience that was visited on the world, perhaps beyond the control of the world. But we do also have to think about the fact that perhaps expecting or wanting or needing to have children resilient in the face of childhood and life experiences that are in the control of others, that's where the resilience can't become the total story. The event itself, the abuse itself must become the focus also. And 1 in 4 starts that with focus on prevention. It also provides the care and the supportive relationship to the individual people. And more importantly, in addition to advocacy and casework, it provides the imperative to push for strategic and policy change. What you won't see in 2021 was again another step led by Maeve Lewis and led very much by Maeve's own personal commitment to this year in 2022 having a National Child Safety Summit. Not a summit for all of us to come together to talk about what we already know, but a summit of collaboration to drive to the top of the agenda to influence future policy at every level, from education and prevention right through to support and aftercare and all that's required on that journey. That's the value of an organisation like 1 in 4 that takes its experience of helping one person and translating that into societal shift and change to try to reduce the possibility of more of that one person coming through in future generations. The dreadful challenge of the pandemic had its influence very prevalent in services that provide counselling and therapeutic intervention in 2021. And 1 in 4, like many others, became the absolute invisible stars of that pandemic. Yes, we saw the protests. Yes, we saw the high visibility of public health measures, all exceptionally important and rightly up there first and foremost to protect us all. But rarely did we see the hidden emergency services, the hidden frontline services, the hidden crisis services, the services which are dependent on a relationship at a time of such crisis in somebody's life when they've commenced or about to commence a disclosure which of itself, the act of disclosing, becomes a significant trauma. I also want to recognise the efforts by 1 in 4 and other organisations in this space to start to also focus us on the needs of survivors, people who come forward as adults to talk about their childhood abuse experiences, and particularly childhood sexual abuse, where, as Maeve said, that feeling of I'm the only one. And in doing that work, we're now thankfully in a space where organisations like 1 in 4 are challenging us, and particularly state agencies, to be sensitive and to be trauma sensitive, even to the language we use, even to the words we might use. The words we might use in a very well-intentioned, very innocent and very what we would consider professional way. But to go back now and check ourselves, how are those words held by the people who need the service we're talking about? How are those words heard by the people who need the policy change that we're talking about? And so language of itself has become a central theme of how survivors experience responses when they come to make them. It would be remiss of me, and may have mentioned the influence of 1 in 4 in participating in collaboration on our most recent child abuse substantiation procedure, one which we delayed for over 2.5 years. But we didn't delay it just because of the pandemic, and I have said this repeatedly in the 3 years that I've come here. We delayed it because we needed to pause and we needed to listen. We needed to listen to the 1 in 4s and all of the other organisations supporting victims of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And we did listen. And still we're left with the enormous challenge of the balance between correctly acting lawfully and acting with fair procedure and acting with all that we require as citizens constitutionally. And at the same time, balancing that with the needs of that person who comes in that door for the very first day to 1 in 4 and all that they will face after coming in that door. That's a balance that's not always possible to achieve in its full desired sense by all. But it is one at least that we can consult on, engage on, hear, listen, and that we can demonstrate, like us as a state agency in our practice of the new child abuse substantiation procedure, that we are as sensitive to the context as we possibly can be, recognising the functions we also have. I want to thank 1 and 4 also for focusing even on the theme of barriers and focusing 2021 on barriers, because there are still many barriers. Thankfully, case reportage has increased and improved, but sometimes that serves to generate a debate for a day on social media, a commentary on a sentence, a commentary on its adequacy, or a commentary on not its adequacy. And yet it's the 1 and 4 and the organisations like 1 and 4 that are there long before prosecution and long after the day of sentence, and sometimes for many, many years in that journey in which a person needs. And it's from that journey that 1 and 4 and organisations like it are best placed to tell us what the experience of survivors is and what they most need, in addition to what we perhaps either think they need or what we have to give by way of being an agency with statutory responsibility. I can only say that the journey continues. It continues for individuals and it continues for us as a society. I think the new strategy, the 3rd strategy on domestic sexual gender-based violence, has itself sought to start to elicit and elucidate the issue of sexual violence and the correlation of that back to the instance of sexual abuse, and particularly childhood sexual abuse. There's more to be done. There will always be more to be done. But if the conversation is easier for professionals like us to say, we haven't always got it right, we have so much to learn. If we can have that conversation in public, if we can have the conversation about how this is not easy, then perhaps we can create the space for that 5-year-old Jack to realise, unfortunately, he's not the only one. But there is hope, there is service, there is support, there is a way, and there is work being done to try to prevent and reduce the instance he found himself in the first place. So thank you, 1 and 4. I'm very happy to be associated with this report. I'm very happy to be associated with you as an organisation, and I'm very happy to be associated with you in what you do. There can be no disputing the fact that organisations like you do what the state often cannot do. The state cannot do it on its own. And it is because of what you do that we're in a better place, and we're in an increasingly better place. But it is equally important that the rest of society, the people who might see this launch of this report today, don't think about it for 5 minutes and then we move on with the news cycle. It is equally important that society recognises the centrality of what you do, but the role that all of us as citizens play in pursuing the agenda of prevention, and where we can prevent, at least ensuring the most appropriate and the most comprehensive and the most survivor-led response that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I think we have one question, so I'll read that out. It's a question for Bernard Gloucester relating to the recent revelations of historical abuse in boarding schools run by religious orders. Has TUSLA in recent weeks seen any related increase in reports or disclosures related to past abuse in schools? And that's from Jack Carr from the Irish Times.
Hi, yes, Jack, good morning to you. I don't have the data yet because it's too soon for that data measurement of the level of activity. I'm sure, as Maeve and her colleagues will tell you, the referral pathway and the contact pathway to us is a little bit different than the initial contact that 1 and 4 and others might receive, which is that initial support help. We would expect an increase from what has been reported in recent weeks, and we would expect that increase as people move into either counselling or therapy, and where they make disclosures, and that those disclosures are subsequently onward to us. Of course, people themselves can self-refer to us as well. And in the case of adults disclosing childhood sexual abuse, that's considered within the childhood abuse substantiation procedure that I mentioned, the new CASP, on which we have a team now in every region. So we'll certainly be monitoring any potential change or trend to that, but it's just a little bit early to say yet. Other events that receive significant news attention do tend to trigger instances of increased reporting, and we've seen that in the past, so it wouldn't be of surprise to us to see an increase in referrals, either directly from people themselves, but also from mandated reporters.
Oh, I think you can expect a flood, Bernard, and,
Yes.
and indeed, thank you so much for your very encouraging words. It's really appreciated here at 1 in 4.
Thank you, Maeve. We just had another question come in. The question here is, has there been any research exploring how either psychotherapy clients or clinicians have been impacted by the mandatory reporting within the Children First?
Maybe I'll take that. Well, I mean, I should say first that at 1 in 4, we absolutely supported the introduction of mandatory reporting as a child protection measure, because so much had gone unreported, undisclosed. However, I think the Children First Act has had some intended, unintended consequences. Now, at 1 in 4, we were terrified that it would stop people coming for therapy, but that actually hasn't happened. And at the first meeting with the client, we explore the limitations to confidentiality, and we explain what the purpose of mandatory reporting is. Most clients have no problem with that in its essence, but most clients do not want to engage with child protection services. So most of the reports we make are third-party notifications. I'm saying that, you know, David came to me and he said he was sexually abused by Jimmy or whatever it might be. And in a sense, those reports are very difficult for TUSLA to investigate, because you know, and often we don't have the name of the offender, and in those cases we haven't been passing on the notifications because it seems pointless. That now will all have to change because of the Phelan judgment. I think a lot of the problem with mandatory reporting lies with the psychotherapist, that people are very uneasy and very anxious about what the impact of having to make that disclosure will be on the therapeutic relationship. And we've done a lot of training throughout the country, mainly through the psychotherapy professional bodies. And when therapists have the space to think it through, to consider how to approach this with clients, then people are able to manage that. Now, there are some difficulties with CASP, as Bernard has mentioned, but certainly the second version of CASP is much more victim focused than perhaps the original version. But I mean, we still would have some concerns about how that very sensitive data is managed, and we continue to engage with TUSLA in that regard. So look, it's an evolving situation. My own belief is that the Children's First Act probably needs amendment, maybe in the context of the review of the Children's Act 1993. I don't know, and I think Bernard might agree with this. Is TUSLA necessarily the best agency to deal with all the historic allegations? So they're the sort of questions we're left with. And Bernard, I don't know if you've any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't disagree with the theme of what you're saying. Firstly, I mean, I think it's important to emphasise, I do support, and I do believe there was a necessity to build on the culture of improved reporting over the past 20 years of Children First by introducing mandated reporting. I do believe that is appropriate. And it would be important for me, I think, as a representative of the state, to make that point clearly. I do believe with that comes challenges, of course, and Maeve has alluded to some of them, and indeed the recent judgment which we're studying will give us more insight. So I think unintended consequence may require some amendment. I think there's more fundamental reform of the law required. Ireland is very advanced in many ways in terms of child protection and child protection legislation compared to other jurisdictions. But I would say, and I have said this publicly before, it's not any shock horror, I don't believe that we're the most appropriate organisation or structure to deal with what is specifically called substantiation, childhood substantiation. In other words, the investigation and determination of founded or unfounded. I don't believe that's an appropriate function, but I do accept it is one that is necessary to be conducted, and the best the state has right now for that is TUSLA. But I would like to see that dealt with in legislative reform.
You, Maeve and Bernard. We have a third question. This is another one for you, Bernard. It's from Gillian Van Turner, one of our board members. As a board member of 1 in 4, I struggle that we have a waiting list. I know we appreciate the support by the state through TUSLA, the HSE and the Department of Justice. As one of the ways to show how far Ireland has come, do you think there's an appetite by the state to increase funding support to organisations such as 1 in 4 to provide counselling and advice for those who come forward?
I do, Gillian, in principle, certainly. I think generally the state and public services struggle with and are challenged by issues such as waiting lists for lots of different services. We see those reported across the whole range of health and personal social services, and it's very hard on the individual experience of any one of those people to single one out over the other. And so I think the issue of waiting lists, and waiting lists, in my view, can be dealt with in 2 ways. One is, of course, improving the infrastructure and resource that's available to respond to the need. And the other is for us to look at how we best use the resource that we have. And, you know, so in some cases that may be a virtual response, that we now use digital enabled technology. In other cases, it may be a multidisciplinary response. So there are lots of different responses. But yes, I do think there's an appetite. The capacity to respond to the appetite goes beyond money, and is about available skill set and available mature professionals developed to be able to respond. And so I think, in as much as we talk about money today, we have to talk about the supply of those professions for the future.
Okay, thank you. In lieu of any additional questions, I think it's just left to thank Maeve, thank you very much, and Bernard for being our guest speaker today, and Jack for giving us consent to play the video, and also just to thank all the supporters and participants. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.